Hi everyone, and welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's video, I will be sharing my experience filing for the H1B workers visa as a Nigerian. So to give you some background, my name is Victory and I am Nigerian. I moved to the United States for college in 2016. I graduated in 2020 in the middle of the pandemic, and I started full-time at a Big Four accounting firm. And that accounting firm, what they do for their international employees is that they file for the H1B visa. Now, the process started for me my senior year of college, because I think it's a process that you have to begin applying for months in advance, like any immigration paperwork that you have to do in this country. So they started the application for me, I believe, as early as the fall of my senior year. So I was graduating in May and they had already started filing in November or December, or collecting paperwork. I don't actually know when they filed. I think the filing happens in the spring, but they started collecting paperwork as early as November. Now, if you're familiar, when you graduate with your undergraduate degree from the US, as an international student, you have the option of doing something that they call OPT, and OPT essentially gives you 1 year during which you can work in any field related to the degree that you just obtained. So I was actively filing for the OPT, and the company was also working on the H1 visa. Now, this is where the story kind of gets a little tricky. So my situation, what happened to me was, the H1B is a lottery. So it's a lot of people, names are put in a hat essentially, and then it's a random system that picks names off of that list, and those people are selected to come forward and apply for the H1B visa. And when you're selected in the lottery, then you give them all of your information, and then they review it and they either approve you or they deny you based on the information that you provide. And so the first time I got picked in the lottery and I was invited to basically apply. But what had happened was, as this was during the global pandemic, my international passport had expired. And the funny thing is, I was supposed to go to Atlanta, Georgia, where the Nigerian consulate is, a week before the world essentially shut down. And because I was in college, I decided I would go the week of spring break instead to get my passport renewed, because that would give me the opportunity to not miss classes and I would be able to essentially get my passport renewed during the break. Hindsight is 2020, y'all, because if I had known, I would absolutely have gone a week earlier. But unfortunately for me, when I went the week after and I got to the Nigerian consulate in Atlanta, the place was closed. Yeah, they were shut down because of the global pandemic, COVID-19, that had broken out in March of 2020. And so I went back home feeling devastated. I wasn't able to renew my passport, but I was holding out hope and, thinking the pandemic will pass. It's just going to be a couple of months. It's been 2 years and we're still here. But I wasn't able to renew my passport, and so whenever I was picked in the H1B process and I was invited to apply, my application ended up being denied because whoever is in charge of immigration doesn't approve you to get a H1B with an expired passport. Those two things just don't go together apparently. So my application ended up being denied. Long story short, I was out of work for about 3 months because this was in the waiting process between my OPT and getting my H1B. Whereas if I had been able to renew my passport, I would have been able to just go directly from OPT to H1B. What does this story teach you though? It's that when you're applying for this H1B, start saving up at least 2 to 3 months of your living expenses if a situation were to happen where your name either doesn't get picked in the lottery, or if something happens and your application ends up getting denied. Also, you have to be very careful about what processes you get yourself involved in. So apply for your OPT, try to do everything legally by the books, make sure that you're not doing any kind of different program that may not be approved by your college or university, because the USCIS does pay attention to all of these things, and sometimes that can flag you for your visa to be denied or for your application to not be accepted. But apart from the USCIS situation and the H1B and the expired passport situation, I do have to comment on the absolute irresponsibility and disrespect that goes on at public service agencies that are related to Nigeria. It's absolutely terrible what these people put Nigerians through when we need to do things for our safety, for our immigration purposes, and to keep us legally in this country that we have spent so much money, time, and energy trying to migrate into. So let me give you a little bit of a story time. So initially, when I had applied to have my passport renewed in Atlanta, they had sent an email, which I appreciated, that they were going to be closed, but I didn't see the email, which obviously was, I take responsibility for that. I should have been keeping track of my emails. But when those initial consultations got cancelled and it was time to try to reschedule, that process was extremely hectic and unnecessarily challenging. So the people who had, for example, myself, who had applications prior that were cancelled because of the pandemic, when we were trying to reschedule our appointments, it was a nightmare. There weren't dates available, there was a backlog, there was a whole bunch of people who were trying to get dates, and that wasn't possible for them. And you know what I ended up doing? I decided, you know what, I'm going to go to Atlanta to this consulate and tell them, today I'm going to renew my passport, whether you people like it or not. And so that's what I did, because I couldn't wait for them to give me a date and then ask me to come when my H1B was basically withheld because my passport wasn't renewed, right? So it was like this endless circle. The consulate didn't have appointments, and if I wasn't able to get an appointment, my passport wouldn't be renewed, and if my passport wasn't renewed, I wouldn't be able to get my H1B visa. And in order for me to even legally be able to continue to stay in this country, I had 90 days from when my OPT expired until it was essentially a bye-bye, right? So I decided in February of 2021, I'm going to go to Atlanta and get this passport renewed. So I booked my flight, went to Atlanta, and went up to the consulate. And if you're Nigerian, this is the situation that we're in, and the battle that we're constantly fighting with corruption and people just not doing things by the book. There were people that were allowed to go into the consulate before everyone else because they had paid a bribe. And essentially, first of all, the way that we were treated, oh my goodness, I wouldn't even say that it was unkind. It was just unnecessary. There was a lot of, I would say, bullying tactics and just unnecessary aggression towards people that if you had spoken to them in a kind way, if you had spoken to them like human beings, the entire process could have been smooth and the transition would have worked. Long story short, I was at the consulate at 6 a.m. in the morning. I kid you not. And we were standing in line for hours. There were a bunch of people going back and forth and saying, oh, you have to pay an extra $100 in a money order because we need X, Y, and Z from you. You don't have an appointment today. There's a different website that you need to use to get an appointment. Just a mess. And another thing is that in the consulate, there was like a different building outside where you could get the money order. And honestly, the whole thing was confusing. But I just stood in line and did what I was supposed to do. I am a believer, so I just was like, you know what, God is with me, so I'm going to get this done today, and that's on period. So I was in line, and it turns out that you needed to have like a $30 money order in order for them to process your materials. And I didn't want to go back to join the line in the back because it was long, and I was one of the first people to get there at 6 in the morning. So I saw this man who was by the gate, and I asked him, hey, is there a place where I can get a money order without joining the line? And he was like, yeah, if you walk down to Quick Trip, which was just a block or two away from the consulate, Quick Trip will help you do a money order. So what did I do? I took myself down to Quick Trip and I got the money order and I came back. And so I went in, and I don't even know where the confidence came from because I'm usually a reserved person. I don't like confrontation. However, this had got me to the point of being frustrated to where I was like, you know what, today we're all Nigerians, so say to me and do whatever to me it is you're going to do. I'm just kidding. But no, the boldness that came upon me that day, because it's just so frustrating when opportunities are denied to you just based on the color of your passport or just based on the place that you were born. I saw a tweet one time. Someone said the first win in your life, win as in WIN, is the country in which you're born. And the day that I went to renew my passport in Atlanta, that held true, unfortunately, because it just was a completely disorganized situation and all of that mess. But long story short, I went in and there was this lady who was standing there who was helping everyone process, and I had the money order, but then they said you have to have an additional $100 money order, which to me wasn't reasonable because I had already paid all of my application fees for my initial appointment in March of 2020, and I still had to pay an additional $30 to be able to get in for this day for that appointment. So I just stood there and I, in my mind it was like, I don't have a $100 money order, but we're gonna get there and see what happens. And the man behind me had asked me, do you have the $100 money order? And I said no. And I said I have faith that however it's gonna happen, that my situation will be different. So I went into the tent with the lady and she looked at all of my paperwork and she said, do you have your $30 money order? I handed it to her. She asked me for the other $100 money order and I said, I don't have a $100 money order. I have the 30 that I'm supposed to have, and I have the paperwork that shows that I had an initial appointment in March of 2020 that was cancelled because of the pandemic. And so she looked at me and I looked at her, and she looked at me and I looked at her, and I told her please. I looked her in the eye and I said please. And y'all, this is where the Holy Spirit came in. I'm a believer, but in that moment something shifted, because I'm telling you, this lady was being absolutely unkind to everyone else, but something shifted in that moment. I'm telling you, someone who went ahead of me, an older woman, this woman was years older than I am, and this lady had yelled at that woman. However, when I went up to her without the money order, something changed, and she literally looked at me and she said, are you a student? And she asked me for my ID. And my ID, in my ID I look really young. I am a student and I looked like a student. So she looked at my ID and she said, all right, well, you don't need the money order, you're a student. And she took my paperwork and we went back to waiting outside. So essentially, this lady, these people had been collecting these extra $100 money orders from people for absolutely no reason. Sometimes you have to pay a lot of money at some of these Nigerian public service institutions that honestly cannot be explained. You don't know what the money is for, you don't know who it's going to, you've already paid for your application, but they seem to be charging you extra in a way that may not be necessary. And mind you, did I mention that we were standing outside and it was freezing, it was cold, there were no chairs, there were just unnecessary, very unnecessary. And then when I was called in, I went in there, they said no bags. So you're going into the place where you're going to renew your passport, but they're asking you not to bring in any bags. And I'm thinking, so what will me bringing a bag in here do? But anyway, I left my bag and I was like, I'm here to do what I'm here to do. And I went in there and we showed up there at 6 a.m. in the morning. Do you know that the entire passport renewal process was 10 minutes? All I had to do was go in there, sign, take a seat, take a passport photograph, and leave. It took 10 minutes to do the actual renewal of the passport, but it took over 6 hours just lounging around, people talking, having to pay extra fees, and all of this intimidation stuff that was absolutely unnecessary, in my personal opinion. Long story short, I had my passport renewed that day, and then it was on to another couple of months waiting for them to mail the passport to me. So when you go to renew your passport, you have to take an envelope, self-addressed envelope, where they will put your renewed passport and then send it to you. And that in itself took another couple of months. Honestly, this entire process was really, really, really frustrating, and it was very eye-opening for me about just how unnecessary the things that we go through as Nigerians in this country and in Nigeria, that systems that are set up by the government, anything that's like public service, that is absolutely zero would not recommend. That's what I have to say. But at the end of the day, I was able to get my passport, thankfully, but this wasn't before my OPT had expired, and I ended up being out of work for 3 months. So what advice am I giving from this entire story? First things first, keep an eye on all of your immigration paperwork. Make sure that even like 6 months to a year before your passport expires, start booking your appointments and start figuring out how you're going to get it renewed. When next my Nigerian passport expires, I don't think I want to go back to Atlanta to renew it. So please, if you know any other means of renewing your passports that's not as excruciating and stressful, please leave that in the comment section below. I would love to find out. I've heard New York is a little easier, but honestly, it's Nigeria, you never know. So please just share your stories about what you've experienced renewing your passport. But as far as H1B goes, keep your eye on all of your paperwork. Make sure that you're communicating with the DSO at your institution and also communicating with the legal counsel or whoever is in charge of filing the H1B. Make sure that you are on top of all of your emails, checking everything that you need to check, and save up as much money as you can, because you might not get chosen in the visa lottery. You may not get approved, right? And you only have a couple of months to figure things out. It was tough because it was coming from being a student to having to make all of these adult decisions, which is stressful, and all of this in the middle of a global pandemic. So it was very tough, but I would encourage you, just save up as much money as you can. Money doesn't solve all your problems, but it does make life a lot easier. So when you start working or whatever job that you have right now, if you're filing for a H1B, have at least 3 to 4 months of your essential expenses. So rent, your bills, groceries, your car notes, your insurance, have that money stacked up so that if anything happens, you won't be out on the streets. Alright, I hope that this video was helpful. If you have experienced filing for the H1B as a Nigerian, as an African, as an immigrant in general, please share your story in the comment section and let us help each other to thrive while we are in this country and do as best as we can. I will see you in my next video. Bye.